Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar entitled South Korea's Education Sector Today, International Education Market, Updates, Trends, and Developments. My name is Tom Wang. I'm the Manager of Country Strategies and Programs at the BC Council for International Education. I will help to moderate today's webinar. BCCIE is a provincial agency under the BC Ministry of Advanced Education, Skills and Training, advancing the interests of international education throughout the entire sector, including K-12, post-secondary, and the language. Thank you very much for joining us today on which promises to be an important presentation on one of BC's most important and largest sources of international students and partnership. Today's webinar is co-hosted by BCCIE and the Trade Commissioner Service, Global Affairs Canada. It is important I acknowledge at BCCIE, we live and work on unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Just before we start the presentation and before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to share some housekeeping notes. First, our presentation will be followed by Q&A session. If you'd like to submit any questions to our panelists, you will be unmuted during the webinar, but you can use the question box to submit your questions. If you need any technical assistance, you can also use the question box to send us your inquiries as well. Today's webinar will be recorded, except for the Q&A session. After the webinar, we will share the recording as well as the PowerPoint slide deck with you on our follow-up email. But if you'd like to download the handout, the PowerPoint slide deck right away, you can go to the handout section in your control panel to download it. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. Jennifer Kay, First Secretary at the Embassy of Canada in South Korea. Joining her today, we have Soo-Hyun Kim, Education Trade Commissioner from the Embassy of Canada in South Korea. Now I'd like to invite Soo-Hyun to share your screen. Now over to you, Soo-Hyun and Jennifer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. As Tom introduced, my name is Jennifer Kay. I'm First Secretary and Trade Commissioner at the Canadian Embassy here in Seoul. We're pleased to welcome you all to the South Korea market briefing session today. Many thanks to BCCIE for hosting this session so that we can bring BC and other institutions across the country some updates from South Korea as we adjust our daily work to our new normal. This is what we're going to discuss today. My colleague, Soo-Hyun Kim, the Education Officer, is going to give a detailed update on education in Korea. But before that, I would like to share some facts about Korea. Some of you might know Korea very well, but if you don't, it's important to understand the country itself, its background, and why education matters so much in Korea. First, let me ask you a question. Do you know the physical size of Korea in comparison to Canada? Korea is about the same size as New Brunswick, making Canada 100 times larger than South Korea. Then what about the population? As you can see on the slide, South Korea has a population of about 52 million. Located in East Asia, Korea is bordered by China to the northwest and Russia to the northeast, and it is separated from Japan to the east by the ocean. Korea is the 12th largest economy in the world by GDP, and actually it is one of only 7 countries in the world belonging to the 30-50 club. The 30-50 club countries are countries that have a higher population than 50 million, as well as more than $30,000 of per capita GDP. As you might have heard, the names of big Korean companies like Samsung, LG, Hyundai, SK, etc. Korea is a rich and developed country, and many parents have the financial means to send their kids abroad. However, demographically, Korea is a rapidly aging society that has the lowest birth rate among all OECD member countries. As a consequence, Korea's student population is expected to shrink in the coming decade. Let's talk about the history of Korea, what is now referred to as the Republic of Korea or South Korea. 70 years ago, 70 years this year, the Korean War from 1950 to 1953 broke out, and the entire peninsula was devastated by the conflict. By the end of the war, only ashes remained. In the 1950s, Korea ranked among the poorest countries with a GDP per capita of less than $100. That's US. Today, its economy is the 12th largest in the world by GDP. Korea's growth-oriented, export-led economic development since the 1960s was so remarkable that it earned the name, the Miracle on the Han River. As many of you might know, Korea has so many things to be proud of, including various electronic goods, LG, automobiles, Hyundai, semiconductors, Samsung, and fast internet everywhere. Ships, steel, as well as BTS and Bong Joon-ho, who made the Oscar-winning film Parasite. How was it possible? How could Korea earn the name the Miracle on the Han River? Besides the strong economic development measures driven by the Korean government, many Koreans attribute this miracle to education. Yes, Korean society places a great emphasis on the value of education. From now on, Soo-hyung will talk to you about education in Korea and some challenges and opportunities in this market.
As Jennifer just mentioned, Korean society places great emphasis on the value of education. After the Korean War, the country was rebuilt from nothing. So many believe that education was the only way to get out of poverty and to become successful. For that reason, the zeal for education in Korea is very strong, and according to a recent OECD report, Korea has the highest share of tertiary educated adults of all OECD countries. Canada is ranked third, closely behind, and the difference between the two countries is that the proportion of studies at the bachelor level is much greater in Korea. This slide shows a photo of students taking a college scholastic ability test in Korea called 수능. This exam is held once a year in November. The photo on the right shows parents who pray all day while their children are taking the test. Well, this is a very common photo. I will show you another common photo in the next slide. This is a photo of thousands of parents and students gathered to attend an info session on strategies for university admission. There are many info sessions organized by private tutoring enterprises, and there's a saying that if mothers work, their children cannot enter top universities in Korea because the parents have no time to attend these sessions. So, while it is good to spend money and effort on education, probably it is too much in Korea. And this competitiveness makes both students and parents somewhat exhausted. This is one of the important reasons why many young couples want to go to Canadian colleges. In addition to the large proportion of public spending, Korean parents spend quite a lot of money for private education. About 30% of public spending on education is spent on private education by households. In Korea, even young kids at the age of 4 or 5 are starting to take private lessons and it is common for children to go to after-hours cram schools, not just the one, but 4 to 10 different kinds of private academies on average. Many parents invest heavily to send their children to these private academies based on the belief that public school education is not enough to gain admission into the best universities. And about 30% of this private spending is for English, which explains why Canada's K-12 education is popular among Korean students. In summary, education is considered the key to success, and most parents are willing to sacrifice for their children's education. Korean parents are still the primary source for financing tuition, even for higher education. This means that parents are the key decision makers when students choose a destination of study. In Korea, most students want to enroll at universities in the belief that a university degree is necessary to get a good job. Unfortunately, many university students think their job majors are not well correlated to their jobs, which can be an opportunity for Canada's post-secondary institutions.
Let's see how the Korean education system works. The Ministry of Education is the central government body responsible for education, and it directs 17 elected metropolitan and provincial offices. The MOE provides general policy direction, but leaves the majority of budget planning and administrative decisions to the municipal and provincial education offices. Since Korea has a central government, Korea has a single track of that's called a 6334 system. Let me explain what 6334 means. The school system in Korea includes early childhood education, primary education, the 6, middle school, the 3, high school, another 3, and higher education, 4, as well as lifelong education. While elementary and middle school were free until recently, high school education was not free. However, now the Korean government is changing and all high school programs must be free by 2021. That's next year. The other thing I would like to highlight is the announcement made by the Korean government to abolish so-called elite high schools. There are 4 types of high schools in Korea, as you can see on this slide. Among them, the red ones are regarded as elite high schools. The current Korean government has promised to abolish the elite category of high schools in Korea, believing that these schools deepen education inequality and undermine efforts to improve public education. In that context, 10 elite private high schools, autonomous private high schools, were ordered by the government to become general institutions last year. Probably this decision to abolish elite high schools might create more chances for those in the K-12 sector for student recruitment. After high school, Korea also provides higher education to students. Unlike Canada, Korea has many private institutions. Both private and public schools receive government funding, although the amount that private schools receive is less than that of public schools. They are, however, subject to the same laws on curriculum, schooling hours, and so on. From the student's perspective, they see university rankings as being more important than tuition fees and do not care much what is a private or a public school. The Korean school year operates on a 2-semester system. Unlike Canada, the first semester runs from March to June, and summer vacation happens between July and August. And the second runs from September to December. Winter vacation is January and February.
Now let's look at the trends of Korean students' outbound mobility. The source of this data is the Korean Ministry of Education, but please note that there is a discrepancy between Canada's IRCC data and Korea's data in the total number of Korean students studying in Canada. So please just refer to this table for reference to understand the general trends. Looking at this table, you can see that China and the US are the top destination of choice among Korean students, and our main competitors would be Australia and the United Kingdom. Recently, we are seeing some shifting trend from the US to other markets. Now, we will see the data by subsector in detail. Let's see K-12 subsectors changing trends. By looking at this table, you will notice that the number of Korean students being sent to study abroad dropped dramatically from 2007 to 2018. I'll tell you why. The 2007 global financial and economic crisis might account for the drop in 2007, and one another reason for this decline would be the opening of new international schools. In 2009, new laws were introduced to create international schools, which were licensed to operate in the Free Economic Zone or on Jeju Island. International schools and boarding schools in Korea are the alternatives to overseas education, which can be considered a challenge for K-12 institutions. But these students at international schools can be a good target audience for post-secondary institutions. So if you are a university rep, please don't forget to reach out to these international schools. In the K-12 subsector, Canada ranked second, but for elementary students, you can see that Canada is known as the best country to study English. Key factors influencing their choice include study environment, competitive cost compared to other English-speaking countries, and the fact that Canada's immigration policy allows Korean parents to accompany their children while the students are studying in Canada. Now, let's look at the changing trends for Korean students studying abroad at post-secondary level, where Canada is the fifth largest destination of choice among Koreans. After the peak between 2008 and 2011, the total number of Korean students studying abroad has slowly decreased with some ups and downs. The fall can attribute it to a number of factors. There is a growing perception that foreign degrees are not appreciated as much as before. When Korean students return home to get jobs after completing their studies abroad, they faced challenges, realizing that they lack local connections to get a job. Korea is a relationship-based society, even when doing business. Places at Korean universities have begun to outstream demand due to a steady decline in population. The government has ordered universities falling behind on the ranking table to merge with other universities or shut down, with an emphasis on increasing quality over quantity. So, Korean universities are trying harder than ever to attract domestic students to their school. The positive side of the trend is that Canada is doing okay compared to the top two countries, the US and China. You can see that the number of students to the US and China are on the decrease significantly in recent years, while Canada is seeing a slow increase. Now, this is Canada's IRCC 2019 ranking. Canada is now world's third leading destination of international students with a staggering 642,000 foreign students. Canada's international student population grew by 13% in 2019 compared to the previous year. South Korea is the third largest student sourcing country to Canada, following India and China. Let's review Canada's IRCC data in detail to understand the changing trends for Korea. Although South Korea is the third largest source country, it is a mature market, maintaining steady numbers. In 2000, Korea was Canada's largest source country. Why? In 1997, Korea faced IMF crisis. And after this crisis, there was a boom for English studying and studying abroad. Since then, we saw continuous growth until 2007. However, Korea was hit hard by the 2007 economic crisis. In addition to the government introduced new laws to create international schools in Korea in 2009, and these schools offered alternatives to overseas education. Between 2007 and 2013, the total number of Korean students to Canada decreased. But since 2013, we are seeing slow growth again. Although Korea is viewed as a mature market, there is room to grow in every subsector due to the increase of middle-income families and stress over the highly competitive educational environment, even from early childhood education. Now, this slide shows the statistic of Korean students to Canada by study level. Traditionally, Canada has held a strong position in K-12 education. But whenever there were external factors such as economic crisis or new laws by the Korean government, K-12 is the sector which is most affected. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, K-12 might be impacted again for the foreseeable future. If you see the blue bar, you can tell that this subsector has been rapidly growing. Over recent years, Canadian colleges have gained popularity primarily owing to work and immigration opportunities after students complete their studies. Korean interest in Canadian colleges and vocational schools will continue to grow as long as Canada's PGWP remains valid. For Canadian universities, there is potential to recruit high-achieving students directly from the country by enhancing brand awareness and establishing partnership with local institutions. The positive news for universities is that slowly Korean students are hearing about the value proposition offered by Canadian universities. When I attended the university fair organized by Brangsamo Asia, the most common question that I got from students was something like this. My sister studied at Harvard, but she had to come back to Korea because she was not able to get a visa to stay after the graduation. I heard that Canada's immigration policy is somewhat different from the US. Can you explain a little bit more about it? During this pandemic, many Koreans are also saying that they're seeing some countries differently as a result of COVID-19. Well, I think this presents an opportunity for Canada. For language school, interest in English language training is not as strong as the past, but it is still significant. However, the increasing availability of local English language programs is beginning to compete with the option of studying abroad. One thing you should note that the numbers here would not be able to capture all numbers, given that Korean students can go to Canada for up to 6 months on an ETA and without a study permit. For French language learning, there is minimal demand, as the most popular foreign languages for students are English and Chinese.
To sum up, what can we say about the Korean market? It is the third largest source country for Canada. Although it is a rapidly aging society, South Korea will likely remain a top student sending country as students' zeal for education and desire to have a competitive edge continue to thrive. Remember that Korea has a great passion for education. Korea is a heavily agent-driven market. Other key players in the markets are many, as you can see. The traditional competitors like the US, the UK, and Australia have invested quite a lot of time and effort into the Korean market. You can find a general perception of Canada by Koreans on this slide, and we'll talk about it in detail in the next slides. We've prepared SWOT analyses for all subsectors, but due to limited time, we're not going to mention these in detail. After the presentation, BCCIE will share the slides with you so that you can review it. K-12. These are language institutions. These are colleges. And here are universities. Early this year, we all faced the unwanted challenge of the coronavirus. On March 11th, 2020, the World Health Organization designated COVID-19 as a pandemic. On March 16th, Canada issued a global advisory not to travel abroad, and from March 18th, Canada implemented a ban on foreign nationals from all countries with some exemptions. Globally, efforts have been made to contain the outbreak, including the closing of schools. So, what's the current situation in Canada and Korea right now? In Korea, the situation is getting better with some restrictions to follow, but for the time being, it is not easy to travel to Korea due to the 14-day quarantine rule applied to all inbound travelers. As for institutional partnerships, many Korean institutions are busy dealing with domestic issues as well as handling inbound students. In Canada, teleworking will remain the default arrangement for many of you, and most importantly, as of today, Canada's border remains closed to international students unless they have a valid study permit issued before March 18th. What kind of advice can we give to prospective students? First, we don't know when the border restriction will be lifted, but just in case, be ready. Although the IRCC process is being delayed and the issuance of new study permits is being controlled, students can still apply for a study permit online. The Visa Application Center in Korea is open for the collection of biometrics. Again, we don't know when the border restriction will be lifted. However, as the closure of the border was sudden, the lifting of the border restriction could also happen quickly, and by that time, it would be better for students to be prepared. Second, I would like to highlight the fact that Canada's immigration policy is still favorable for international students. IRCC announced more flexible rules for student eligibility for Canada's post-graduation work permit program. The revised rules allow students to complete up to 50% of their studies remotely from outside Canada without any impact on their PGWP eligibility. In other words, these students will not have time deducted from the length of their work permit for any period of study completed outside of Canada up to December 31st of this year. We all know that the coronavirus has radically transformed sectors across the globe, and education is no exception. Given all of that, an economic recession would be inevitable for all countries. When you shortlist your target markets, the economic outlook would be one piece of key data that you would rely on. I want to share the global economic outlook released by the OECD this June. This outlook focuses on two equally probable scenarios. One in which a second wave of infection with renewed lockdowns hits before the end of 2020, and the other one in which another major outbreak is avoided. While the path to economic recovery remains highly uncertain, the projection for Korea looks better.
Here are some general tips to be successful in the Korean market. Branding. As we have mentioned already, Korea is a relationship-based society. So it is important to strengthen people-to-people ties and word-of-mouth connection, not only with your students, but also with your local partners such as agents or schools. According to the Korean data, Korea's internet penetration rate reached almost 96% in 2018. So try to be active online where your students are active. On this slide, you can find which search engines and social channels are popular among Koreans. Please try to utilize your students and parents as ambassadors, letting them share their experience in Canada in the local language, which is Korean, and on the right social channels. When you work with agent, there are several things to keep in mind. Given the high employee turnover rate in this field, maintaining up-to-date list of agents and training them are the most difficult and important things. Before COVID-19, I asked schools to visit the market on a regular basis, but now with COVID-19, I would like to encourage you to have a virtual meeting instead of communicating by email. Like other Asian countries, Korea is a very relationship-based society. There are so many institutions in the education sector, so if you want to be remembered, you should try harder. Government-funded program. Please remember that the Korean government and education offices often set aside funds to train their employees abroad or provide scholarship to students to experience studying abroad. Of course, it is not easy and it would require your time and effort. However, participating in those programs is a good means for word-of-mouth branding, and by building a relationship with them, you might be able to identify other chances in the long term, such as summer language programs or student-teacher training program. Finally, the most difficult question is here. What can we do during the COVID-19 or in the post-corona era? Due to the travel restriction imposed in Canada and Korea, it is unlikely that Canadian institutions will be able to come to Korea anytime soon for activities, but this time can be used to identify areas of improvement. This time can be used to come up with new ideas. I would like to share one thing that I really like. We cannot predict the future, but we can create the future. To be honest with you, I'm also trying to find an answer for the new normal, and most of you would already know what I'm going to tell you, but if I may share some thoughts with you. First, virtual activities. With the pandemic continuing to disrupt worldwide travel and study abroad, we have to revise our event offering as well as strategies approaching prospective students, parents, and agents. It is important to ensure strong communication with your partner agent and prospective students. Branding activities. Try to find student ambassadors. Try to identify most frequently used social platforms for each market and utilize them in the local language. Also, try to relax or differentiate admission requirement. For example, college scholastic ability test. In Korea, there are 3 different types of admissions for universities, and some students granted for early admission do not need this test. However, most Korean high school students are taking this test. Some US and Australian colleges are accepting Korean students based on this test result. In Korea, the transcript of high school records can be somewhat misleading, as there are non-official rankings even for high schools, and Korean parents even move their homes to enroll their children at top high schools.
In June, we attended an online forum, and the keynote speaker was Jeff Maggioncalda, the CEO of Coursera, the online education platform. According to him, new enrollment for Coursera was up 10 times since mid-March. Of course, I don't think online learning will replace face-to-face programs, but it is certain that online programs and technology in the classroom is essential now and may be accelerated as a result of this crisis. In addition, if your institution takes part in those online learning platforms such as Coursera or MOOC, it would become a good way of raising your school's profile. Collaborative Online International Learning, COIL, is an emerging way to expand opportunities for global learning and intercultural experiences to a greater number of students through virtual and non-virtual methods. COIL has been adopted by many universities in the US and worldwide. Try to identify your partner institution who are interested in such a project or brainstorm ideas. Last but not least, provide emotional support. A crisis is defined as a time of significant challenge and instability. We've heard over here that there is a growing fear among prospective students due to some incidents of racism towards people of Asian origin, including international students. Sometimes your current or prospective students might ask you questions for which you don't have answers, but just listening to them and understanding their situation with emotional support will reward you back. Often we've seen that international students choose their destination because of the person they met. I'm sure most of you already know what the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service is, but just in case you're not familiar with the TCS promotes Canadian economic interests in the global marketplace. Our key services include preparation for global markets, market potential assessment, problem solving, such as customs issues, etc., and identification of qualified contacts. In particular, for the Embassy in Seoul, last year we organized an Edu-Canada Agent Fair where Canadian institutions met with local agents in an efficient manner. We also organized the Canada-Korea Colleges Networking Seminar for institutional partnership. We also organized various visa seminars with the IRCC officer to educate local partners and so on. As trade commissioners, our main focus is on facilitating B2B activities between Canadian education institutions and key local contacts through organizing agent fairs and networking seminars. We also assisted Canadian education institutions in organizing their own info sessions at the embassy. Again, with COVID-19, we're also trying to come up with some new ideas to cope with the crisis, and whenever new opportunities arise, we will be sure to let you know.
So this is us. If you'd like to discuss more about the Korean market, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you. Maxi.
감사합니다.